Hello everybody, and in this video I am going to be reviewing volume number 1 of the grim dark fantasy Berserk of Gluttony. This one is written by Isshiki Ichika with illustrations by Fame. It's released officially in English by 7 Seas with a translation by Hengtee Lim. If you want to pick up your own copy of this one, I'll have links in the description down below. In Berserk of Gluttony, we have main character Fate Graphite. Yes, the guy wearing black, his last name is Graphite, and he has a fate. Anyway, this world that Fate lives in is a world in which all people are given a blessing by the gods, a special skill or ability that is unique to them. Well, not a unique, but it kind of guides your path, exactly what you're going to do with the rest of your life type thing. Now, Fate unfortunately finds himself with a very useless and horrible blessing called gluttony, which basically means that the dude is always hungry. Yeah, that seems to literally be the extent of his blessing. When his parents pass away, his own village kicks him out because he's useless, and because, you know, he's always hungry, and if he's no good to them, he can't. Those who don't work don't eat, right? And of course, Fate is pretty much always kind of weak and tired because, again, always hungry. He manages to make his way to the main sort of castle city, the capital of his nation, and pretty much gets himself a job as the punching bag for a family of esteemed royal holy knights. But however, in his duties as that, he meets one holy knight named Roxy, who's about his age. She is going to be the inheritor of her family. She takes the job very seriously, and unlike many of the other holy knights, she actually does believe that she should be a knight for the people. And so, of course, Fate feels a great deal of affinity towards her. Well, one night, he is leaving his job as one of the guards at the gates, which he does because the holy knights that he works for are too good for gate duty, and he's passed it off to Roxy, and as he's walking along, he notices some bandits trying to make their way over the wall. Well, he runs back to Roxy, tells her, and she's like, "Don't worry, I'll go take care of it." She runs off. Well, one of the bandits gets away. He's already wounded. He comes staggering towards Fate, and Fate, in the ensuing encounter, manages to kill the man. When he kills him, his gluttony, his blessing, truly kicks in, and what he discovers is that gluttony, what it actually does is steal the blessings, the abilities of others, as well as increases his own personal abilities. Well, I'm thinking you can probably guess where the book starts to go from there. Berserk of Gluttony, of course, is a darker, slightly grimmer light novel, fantasy light novel. It is also an OP main character, power fantasy type light novel. However, there is at least one or two twists to this one that make it slightly more interesting. And that all boils down to Fate and his gluttony. And there's another slightly, well, very Deus Ex Machina moment in this book early on, so it's not even really a spoiler, where Fate discovers this rusted old sword that is the only sword he can afford, and he discovers that the sword is not only sentient, but that it seems to have abilities pretty in line with Fate's own gluttony ability. The reason I mention this is because between gluttony as well as his sword, it creates a mechanic where Fate cannot become omnipotent power, like overpowered. There is sort of a limit on what he can do, because the more powerful enemies that he kills, the more gluttony hungers. If he doesn't feed gluttony, it basically will reduce him to a ravenous, mindless monster who will kill indiscriminately. In other words, Fate is constantly having to try and push himself towards finding stronger enemies, more powerful enemies. And when that fails, he actually can feed some of his experience, well, most of his experience, to the sword, which then drops his level back down to his low end. So there is kind of this mechanic between the sword basically being a parasite on Fate himself, as well as Fate's own ability, that brings more of a balance to this thing and also creates a very interesting sort of internal conflict where the character has to try and determine for himself, what is he going to do? Like, how far can he push himself? How many monsters can he kill? How long until he has to resort to killing other things? You know, how can he even enjoy a certain type of life in one place, because eventually the monsters in that area will not be strong enough for him to take on, and he'll have to pass up and leave that life behind, or basically either kill himself or become a monster himself. Now, obviously with this setup, you can tell that the book is a little bit darker. Now, it's not an isekai, obviously. The only thing that it really has that I kind of wish they would do without, but I understand why it's there, is again, it does have that whole leveling thing where they can check their stats, you know, cast level or whatever the hell it is. And really, I think it exists mostly there just to help make it stupidly obvious how powerful Fate becomes, but then also how weak he becomes when he really has no other option but to feed his strength to the sword. So, I mean, it's kind of justifiable, but again, it's one of those mechanics that I must admit I'm getting a little bit tired of, that I wish these types of novels would find a more inventive or interesting way to deal with this type of thing. Also, the world itself is rather bleak. It's not that there's no good people. Roxy, of course, is this shining beacon of goodness, and Fate, I did like the fact that it really was just this one girl for Fate, and even though there's another female character who is briefly introduced, who is on the cover of the second volume, meaning she's obviously going to be a little bit more important, I'm guessing, I still believe that this is going to be like a one girl type thing. I can't really see this becoming a harem, especially with what happens in the first book, because it just would destroy so much of Fate's motivations that it would really make him a much less interesting character. And I'll be honest, Fate isn't exactly the most interesting character to start off with. He's not a bad dude, I'm not saying that at all, but he really is a character that has been created to work in the situation that he's in. You know, he is that underdog character who's going to use his newfound abilities to rise up and to do some good, but at the same time, he realizes that his powers really aren't exactly in line with good, and so he's kind of having to accept and face that fact that he's probably going to have to walk a very thin line between, you know, good, evil. He's much more of a gray character than we see in a lot of these kind of OP power fantasies. And there are also some hints that there might be a bigger story to this thing. I'm not going to get into the full details because I try to keep these things spoiler free, but if you've played some very classic JRPGs, remember the good old days where your main character would start off as this lowly piece of crap that nobody cared about, and then by the last end of the game you were fighting God? I kind of get the vibe of that with this one. So all in all, Berserk of Gluttony, it's not bad. It is, I wouldn't say that it really is groundbreaking in a lot of ways. It is obviously ticking off a lot of boxes in that sort of darker fantasy level. The world is kind of bleak. Most of the people that should be good people are assholes. You know, it's kind of hitting all those boxes. You've got a main character who is rising up from being a lowly piece of trash that nobody cares about to being a strong and powerful, perhaps near godlike individual. But as I said, I did enjoy the fact that it at least showed the author was making very interesting choices in order to try and maintain more of a balance, so that it wasn't like Fate could go from 0 to OP within a couple of chapters. In this video, I want to say a special thanks to Yoon, Shelly Ann, Renzaz, Jonathan McCabe, and to Hutch, and to all the rest of my patrons over on Patreon who help me to keep this channel running, keep the channel improving, and supporting my other projects such as EnglishLightNovels.com and the Light Novel Podcast. For my next review, I'm sticking with the whole fantasy thing, but it's a fantasy isekai with a slight twist. Just, what happens when the person being summoned isn't meant to be a hero, but is actually rather a horrifying threat that must be eliminated? My next review is going to be volume number 1 of The Executioner and Her Way of Life. That'll be my next one. In the meantime, thank you for joining me in this video. I look forward to seeing you in my next one. Till then, bye-bye for now.